Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to our special council meeting of Monday, August the 30th. I do wish to begin tonight by recognizing that we are meeting formally on the traditional territory of the Sauk Nation. So council, I'll turn your attention to item 3. With the approval of tonight's agenda, we also need to add the supplementary information, and we will also need to pass the M192 resolution as well. So to start us off, I'll ask then that the agenda for the August 30th special meeting of council be adopted with the addition of the supplementary information to item 5.3, the presentation of the draft OCP as well, and we'll add like an item 3.B that deals with the ministerial order. Okay, so moved by Councillor Beto, seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. All those in favor and opposed, that's carried unanimously. And I'll confirm that at this point in time, we don't have any councillors online virtually. Okay, so then attending tonight's meeting would be Councillor Lajeunesse, Councillor Betos, Councillor Bateman, and myself, Mayor Tait. You just may not recognize us with our masks on, so I thought I would just make that clear. Okay, so the next item up will be the ministerial order. And that is that council is holding this meeting without members of the public in attendance under Ministerial Order M192, as council chambers cannot safely accommodate the unknown number of public participants wishing to attend, and that council is committed to ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability through the submission of written comments and the provision of live and recorded broadcasts of the meeting. So I'll look for a mover to that motion. That's moved by Councillor Betos and seconded by Councillor Lajeunesse. While we're on this, for the record, you'll note that all members of council as well as staff that are currently within chambers are physically distant and also wearing masks to conform with the current public health orders. So what I would like staff to do is just to reconfirm where we're at, and I think that going forward, if this is going to be the case, then we're going to have to shift to a full virtual meeting until there is a change in restrictions, because we have half in, half out, and longer meetings will be uncomfortable for all of us to wear a mask for a long time. So I just think we should get that clarity before the next meeting. Councillor Betos?
So that the request is for staff to check with
yeah, just as a follow-up to this. And then it may be for the next meeting, which is September 20th, yeah. So we fully know what that is, and if it is still this mask mandate, that we switch to full virtual until such a time that the restrictions change. Because even if we're physically distant, 2 members of council will not be, we're stuck. Technology is great, but the cords have a limit to them, as well as the room itself in terms of how much we can stretch out without expanding out the windows of the building. So that might make sense. Okay, so I'll ask staff for that, and then all those in favor, please. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, item 4 is public question and comment period. So this particular section pertains to items 5.1 and 5.2 of the agenda only, and that's to do with our wastewater plant. We will, after that, resolve into a committee of the whole where we'll seek more public input on the official community plan. But right now I'm looking for public input specifically for 5.1 and 5.2. So I'll just ask our staff if we have any members of the public who wish to speak to these 2 items.
Your Worship, we don't have anyone who's indicated they would like to speak to these 2 items. However, there are several members of the public on the call, so if they would like to speak to items 5.1 or 5.2, they could just put up their hands in the Teams meeting and then we could recognize them from there. But there is nobody who has pre-registered.
Okay, we'll just give them a few minutes then to see if there's any members of the public that wish to speak to these items on the wastewater treatment plant Contract Administration Awards or the Consulting Services Award.
I don't see any hands, Your Worship.
Okay. May I confirm that Councillor McMath, I think, has joined the meeting? Okay, so as of this time, we'll make a note in the minutes that Councillor McMath has joined the meeting virtually. Okay, so that takes us into item 5.1. This is the wastewater treatment plant design, project management, and contract administration awards. So I'll turn that to staff, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to Council, procurement was conducted for the design, project management, contract administration for the district's wastewater treatment plant expansion project. 3 proposals were submitted through this procurement. They were all evaluated based on the following criteria that's presented in the report. Stantec Consulting had the most favorable proposal, and in front of Council for consideration is a resolution and recommendation for award of this contract to Stantec Consulting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carter. I'll ask members of council if you have any questions in regards to the staff report on this particular item. Any questions? Go ahead, Councillor Bateman, your question.
Yeah, through you to Mr. Carter. Thank you for the report, which is brief, and it does state you're following the most favorable proposal and deemed to be the most beneficial according to these 6 criteria. However, I would like to see a little more detail on why Stantec, and as well as in both these proposals, is in fact the most favorable proposal. Could you elaborate, sir? Where are you, Jeff?
So, through Your Worship
there you
to Council, the following criteria was put under the proponents to basically propose on project understanding and approach, so knowledge of the district's wastewater treatment plant as well as the system. Stantec does have over 20 years experience plus working with the district and with their system. They were also evaluated on a base scope pricing where primary components of the aspects of the design were put forward for the proponents to provide base pricing on. Stantec's pricing was the lowest. They do have the best understanding of our system. They have an excellent qualified team that has been working with their system for 10 to 20 years, most of their staff. And in comparison to the 2 other proposals that were submitted, they were by far the most beneficial for the district and for this project.
Thank you very much, sir.
Does that, your microphone is, I turned it off.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Carter. That's good to know. Social procurement considerations, how does that factor in?
Through Your Worship to Council, so we put a social procurement aspect in this proposal. In design contracts, there's very limited stuff design consultants can do as far as social procurement, but all proponents put forward that they would go after local subcontracts where possible throughout any subcontracts that were required through the project.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from members of council? I'll just see, I can't quite see Councillor McMath, so Councillor McMath, please just use the raise hand feature on the Teams if you do wish to speak to an item, okay? So the recommendation is that council authorize staff to award and enter into a general service agreement with Stantec Consulting for the design, project management, and contract administration of the district's wastewater treatment plant expansion project. Moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Any comments on the motion that's before us? Yes?
No.
No? 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 No. Okay, all those in favor then? And that's unanimous. Thank you. So that brings us to 5.2, the Municipal Wastewater Design and Consulting Services Award. Back to Mr. Carter, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to Council, very similarly to the last procurement item, we posted a 21-day proposal. This is for the general consulting services for wastewater collection system design, evaluation of sewer serviceability reviews for developments within town, as well as the development of the master plan and small design projects that will be required within the collection system. And Similar evaluation criteria proponents proposed on, and the results were the same, with Stantec being the most favorable consultant. Prices were the most competitive, and the understanding of our system with their history here was most favorable and in best interest of the district to proceed with Stantec Consulting for this general service agreement and award.
Okay, questions for staff? Go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious about how, I just used just. I have to eliminate just. I'm curious about how this dovetails with the liquid waste management plan, which is due for review at some point.
Through your worship to Councillor Bateman. So the liquid waste management plan developed 2012. Certain aspects of it will be evaluated through the design of the wastewater treatment plant to see if there's any adjustments that need to be made under the criteria in the liquid waste management plan. Through the delivery of the design projects and going into feasibility studies and the master plan development, the consultants will be required to review in conjunction with district staff the liquid waste management plan, and we would be bringing forward revisions for council's consideration if required.
Okay, so the sewer master plan development, is that one and the same thing?
Correct. The sewer master plan development has identified certain areas and aspects of the liquid waste management plan, generally such as taking septic fields off, putting them on collection systems. The master plan is engaging in feasibility studies to bring those areas off the septic and to do cost analysis to see if they're feasible to bring forward and put into the district's collection system. So they are part and parcel. The master plan development will be working towards executing aspects of the liquid waste management plan, and we will be bringing forward revisions of the liquid waste management plan if required.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, other questions from members of council? Okay, so the recommendation tonight then is that council directs staff to award and enter into a general service agreement with Stantec Consulting for municipal engineering wastewater design and consulting services. Look for a mover, please, by Councillor Bateman, and seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Any discussion or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor then? And that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Okay, so at this point, we're going to switch into a committee of the whole so that we can have a more robust discussion with our OCP committee. So I'll look for a motion, please, that council resolve into committee of the whole for discussion of the draft official community plan. That's moved by Councillor Beddoes and seconded by Councillor Bateman. Everyone's clear on why that's happening? Good. Okay, all in favor then? And that's unanimous. Okay, so we're now sitting as a committee of the whole. So in this case, we have a bit more time to hear from committee members. And council, remember, there's only one motion, one mover required for a motion. So we're meant to be in a more informal setting here, although we haven't physically moved anywhere. Okay, so welcome everyone, and I would like to welcome the Official Community Plan Advisory Committee. Thank you very much for all the work that you've been doing on behalf of the district and for the long hours that you've spent over almost the past year, actually, working with Councillor Beddoes as well as our staff and our consulting team. So at this point, I will hand it over to our staff, to Mr. Paolo, to introduce us to our report and to take us from there. Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight, I'll start off just by saying a few words regarding the project and a lot of the success that we've had and who that's attributed to as well. We have Helen Ritz joining us virtually, who is the chair of the committee, who will speak on behalf of the chair and just speak to the recommendations of tonight's report. And then following that, we have DIALOG, our consulting team, who has been just wonderful to work with and help us get to the state that we are now with a draft document before committee of the whole. And they have a presentation that they'd like to go through explaining the draft document. And then following that, I think would probably be appropriate time to open it up to question period, just to seek further clarification on any questions that you might have. So Before I turn it over to the committee chair, I just want to acknowledge that at this point, we're here and we're very thankful that we were able to work on an OCP that had the benefit of council already having a transportation master plan put in place and approved, as well as Parks and Trails master plan. Also, the economic analysis and the housing needs report. Those are all critical pieces that not every municipality gets the benefit from going into an OCP process. Those are usually action items that come out of a review like this. So we're really fortunate to build upon those pieces and also further work and define with the public input based on those documents. Also, with the committee, they've been excellent in providing input throughout this process and representing the community here to ensure that the vision of SUC is accurate and that the plan is actionable. Also, our consultants have done an excellent job throughout the engagement processes and developing this draft document, and we look forward to further engaging with them and developing the draft into a bylaw format. Also, our file manager, District of SUC staff member Catherine Lecision, she's been great managing the project, ensuring that this project proceeds to a successful completion. As well, Christina Moog, our communications staff member. This has really been a key piece for us, and with her joining the district, we've really seen this project really come into full force with having the great ability to reach out to the public and get the necessary feedback to inform this document. And lastly, the public. I haven't been part of a process like this that's been so successful to date with the amount of input that we've received from the public, and I'm just very thankful for the residents of SUC who've been able to give us consistent feedback throughout the first two phases, which has really informed this document tonight. And looking forward to moving forward throughout phase 3 with a draft document to get further input from the public to really solidify this document so that we can get it read into bylaw format and ultimately give the public that vision that they've been speaking about for so long as an actual OCP in the following year. So we're really looking forward to that. With that, I'll turn it over to Committee Chair Helen Ritz, and she has a few words that she'd like to say.
Thank you, Matthew. I'd also say thank you to Chandra, who's really helped us through this process. This is odd to see myself on camera. I guess our committee was asked to make 3 recommendations at our last meeting. The first was that we would receive this draft, and we were also given the promise that our feedback, we were given probably 2 weeks to review the draft before we had the meeting. And so we were promised that any feedback that we wanted to give on this draft would be given in the next round of together with the other public engagement. And the second recommendation, so we passed that, and the second gave the recommendation. The second recommendation was that the draft would go forward to public engagement. And we did agree to this, although it wasn't a unanimous decision. All on the committee would have liked maybe to see the document be a little bit more polished, or perhaps polished is the wrong word, but just it's a dense read. I don't think any of us disagree with anything in it. The staff and Dialogue have done a great job capturing the public engagement, and the policies that they put forward are all things I think we would all agree with, but it is a dense read, and we got lost sometimes in the read. So I think we would have liked to put out something to public that was kind of to help the reader go from goals to policies or goals to implementations to policies to, just a roadmap. We found it a little dense to read. So, but anyway, we understand there's a timeline, and most of us agreed that it was in a good enough shape to go forward. So we're looking forward to getting feedback and being part of the next steps. I'm getting some feedback here, but and also we asked that our notes, because we had some notes that we presented, and those notes I think are part of a supplementary agenda. So we'd ask that Mayor and Council please review those notes, and you may or may not agree, but those were we agreed to go forward with it as long as our notes were included. And then the third thing we were asked to recommend was that Council, I can't forget I don't remember the exact wording, but that we were asked to recommend a 40% reduction, or that the OCP would include a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And we chose not to recommend that. I'm not sure if I'm using the right terms, but we just felt that really maybe that was outside of what we should do. The OCP currently does use 40% throughout the document, but we understand that there's a climate action committee that's working on this, and that also SUC recently agreed to a 50% reduction by 2030. So we decided we'll just stay out of that. I did listen to an interesting podcast yesterday, and it said that for every one step you take today in climate action, it'll be worth 10 steps in 5 years. So personally, I would ask that you take all the steps you can on that. Yeah, and I think that's it. We've all worked together, I think, pretty well. I'm sure it's a little bit frustrating sometimes working with committees, and we all have strong opinions. But yeah, just thank you for allowing me to be part of this process. And I think we're all trying to do our best, and we all want the same things, which is really neat. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Chair Ritz, for presenting to us. In terms of just the comments that you've made there, I could respond that I believe that the committee will be involved in the next phase of the work. We do have the notes, so we have a supplementary package that has a link to the notes. So they are there, we've seen them, so thank you very much for providing those notes to us. And yes, in terms of the GHG reductions, we do have a committee that's looking into that more succinctly, and that the plan was, because things evolve outside of even local government jurisdiction by the province and the federal government, those pieces will change likely, whereas the OCP is meant to be a document in place for 10 years. So if we try to always adapt to the climate objectives, we'll never get the OCP finished, because there's just other elements at play. So that's where we can produce another strategy outside of the OCP that the OCP would point to, that would enable us to be a bit more nimble as things change and evolve there. So that's also a great recommendation from the committee as well. So thank you very much. Okay, so I'll turn it back to Mr. Powell then. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think at this time now, we'll turn it over to Dialogue. They have a presentation that they have prepared, and they're going to run through the process. Oh, sorry.
Maybe just a moment. Councillor Bettles would like to speak, and I also just want to note publicly that Councillor Ebony Logans is virtually in the meeting, and she was able to join in prior to our last motion. Okay, go ahead, Councillor.
I just want to acknowledge that Helen Ritz, our chair, it's her birthday today, and she made the effort to bypass a party for her to deliver that thing today. So Helen, on behalf of us here and the OCP committee, it's actually been wonderful working with you, and thank you for taking that extra time today, and hopefully you have a great birthday. So thanks again.
Thank you, Helen. I would offer to sing to you, but that might ruin the day for you, so maybe we'll just leave it at that. But thank you so much for being with us and for making this a priority. That's a really big move there. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Powell.
Thank you. If Dialogue is ready now, we'll allow them to share their screen, and they have a presentation that's been prepared to run council through this. I see.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jennifer, yeah, we can hear you. I can see Emily on screen, and then I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. I can see my colleague Emily, but I can't see whether I'm in view. So, Councillor Bettles, I think this is the party for Helen. That was my understanding anyway. Your Worship, Mayor Tait and Council, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you at this very exciting milestone of what is a very exciting process. My name is Jennifer Fix. I'm an urban planner working with my colleague Emily Reynolds, who is also an urban planner, joining us today as well. We are part of the team led by DIALOG, and it's been a true honor for us to work with your community to co-create this plan that's before you today. And before I get started, I want to acknowledge the excellent guidance and the good work of the district staff team, who have been a true pleasure to work with from the very beginning of this process. Also wish to acknowledge the valuable perspectives shared by the OCP Advisory Committee, as well as the insights and energy of the broad community. So this plan before you is the culmination of over 1 year of collaboration and visioning with your community. And we are really inspired by the level of engagement during a pandemic. Despite the pandemic, the level of engagement was higher than we often see in other communities. So that was a real inspiration. I also want to acknowledge that the lands and waters that we're speaking about today are on the unceded territories of the Sauk and Siano First Nations. And as you know, district staff have been working with Indigenous partners during this plan process. And I wish to acknowledge the insights that they've shared to inform this plan as well. So today what we'd like to do is to offer a recap of some of the process highlights, and then introduce you to the OCP. We welcome the opportunity to answer your questions and to participate in a conversation as you desire. Next, please. Next slide. So early in the process, where residents were invited to picture Souk in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we asked some really exciting questions. First, want to just say that the folks using and administering this plan daily are likely primarily going to be district staff and council, partners and stakeholder groups like developers and property owners who are undergoing development. And so this OCP has been written accordingly. So it needs to be user-friendly and implementable from those perspectives. At the same time, this OCP was created for everyone with a stake in Souk's future. So in that way, this OCP is for the children of Souk, for elders of Souk, everyone in between. It's for residents whose ancestors have been here since time immemorial, as well as for the residents who don't live here yet, who haven't been born or who haven't moved here. It's for residents who own homes, it's for residents who rent them, as well as for residents who don't have homes at all. So this plan is for everyone because it will shape Souk in a way that touches the lives of all people. So this is why the engagement process was so paramount for this plan. Next. So you may recognize this question. You may recall that this was one of the first questions we posed to yourselves, to district staff, to the advisory committee, and to the broad community. And early in the process, the focus really was on the dream component of this question. We wanted to hear what people's hopes and aspirations were. And so as part of this, we wanted to mine the wisdom that resides in your community. So we understand that every resident is an expert in their own lived experience of Souk. So through that lens, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about Souk, we learned a lot about the future of Souk. And so what we heard really became the foundation of this OCP, and Emily will walk you through a summary of that dialogue in a few minutes. But before we look to the community input that really drove the creation of this OCP, we as a consultant team, kind of coming in with fresh eyes, we took a look at some of the attributes of Souk through a lens that was focused on things like land use and urban form. So these are some of the functional hearts of an OCP. It really tops the list of requirements put forth in the legislation. So we undertook a legislation and we discovered a few themes. And it was interesting because a lot of these themes that we observed early in the process actually were echoed by the community in later phases. So I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of some of these themes to offer some context for the OCP that's before you today. Next. So one of the first things we observed, is no surprise, is that the shoreline and coastal habitats in Souk, the freshwater habitats, the mix of forest, wetland, meadows, this really characterizes Souk as a community immersed in natural beauty. It really is one of the things that sets Souk apart. So along with your incredible park network and trail network, it gives residents exceptional access to green and blue spaces. So this was something that we were really excited to see, and we've heard a lot from residents since. Next. And looking at where people reside within Souk, we came to understand that 90% of residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park, which is fantastic. Another theme that we saw, next please, was actually more of a question. We said, well, what is Souk? In some ways, it's characterized by a rural-like setting with natural and farm areas. At the same time, it definitely has a concentration of homes and businesses that unquestionably make it an urban area. But since its incorporation, we know that physical growth, the physical expansion of the city, of the district rather, has become less efficient over time. So we know that central areas tend to be more compact than newer areas located at the periphery of the community. So there seems to be a trend towards suburban land use and urban form, which of course influences everything from transportation choices to infrastructure costs. Next. Another thing we noticed that housing choices really vary depending on what your need is. So with housing costs that are relatively, I want to emphasize that word, relatively affordable compared to other communities in the region, residents do have access to more housing options in relative terms. So this has made the community appealing for families and other households. But at the same time, the majority of these homes are single detached houses. 65% are single detached, and you compare that to the rest of BC, and that's sitting at about 45%, or across Canada, 55%. So next slide, please. And if you look at a map of where these dwelling types are, you can see that there are some areas of Sooke that are comprised almost entirely of single detached homes. So that's that light yellow. So this means that residents who need different housing types, like people who would like to downsize to smaller homes, they may have to leave their neighborhood or even the community to do this. So this is an important consideration that we observed as we understand that Sooke's demographic is continuing to gradually age. Next. Changing climate. So this arguably should top the list as it's the most pressing existential issue of our time. So along with the rest of the world, as you know, Sooke is facing a climate emergency. So with the projected increase of 1.5 degrees within the region by 2050, we know that Sooke will experience higher flood risk, sea level rise, more summer droughts, more fires, and adapting to these changes will have to be part of the way of life in Sooke. So we know, I guess the good news story is that human activities within cities, within communities like Sooke, is responsible for 70% of GHGs globally. So this means that communities like Sooke have a really important role in controlling or influencing GHG reductions. This is not new information. We know, as was said earlier, Council is committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. We know that you have a really strong climate action committee providing strong insight and guidance on this issue. So this is all setting things up really nicely. One thing we want to point out related to this issue is that on-road transportation accounts for more than half of Sooke's GHGs. So that's 55% of the GHGs, single largest contributor after buildings. So this means that the transportation situation that we're looking at really starts to make sense why it's such a big contributor when we look at the destinations within the community. Next slide, please. So when you look at the destinations within Sooke, we can see that, there we go. That Sooke, while it's rich with cultural and recreational destinations and enviable network of parks and open spaces, unfortunately, very few residents have access to important daily needs within walking distance of home. So for example, grocery stores is a great proxy for how walkable a community is because it's the #1 trip generator outside of work and school. And we know that only 11% of people living in Sooke are within a 10-minute walk of a grocery store. So anytime someone needs a quart of milk, they're more than likely hopping in their car to go get it. Likewise, only 18% of residents are within a 10-minute walking distance of retail. Only 21% of kids are within of households are within walking distance of an elementary school, and only 15% are within walking distance of public facilities like libraries and community centers. So this often means that transportation, so next slide please, transportation including walkability is a challenge. So we know Sooke is car dependent. We can see this kind of objectively, and we've also heard this time and time again from the community. We know that more than 90% of all trips are taken by private vehicle. District's a commuter community, with most leaving the area for work. But the picture isn't that much different for trips within the district, with over 80% trips taken by car. So we can't necessarily point the finger at the commuter dynamic as the sole reason why Sooke is car dependent. Within Sooke itself, or trips within Sooke, it also tends to be the case. So some of the key challenges are that the destinations aren't really within walking distance of home. There tends to be a lack of walking and cycling infrastructure. There's issues with the quality of local transit service. and also issues with connectivity. So what these images are showing you is, if you look at the gold dotted line, that represents 400 meters or a 5-minute walk as the crow flies. But when you factor in the real travel distance, someone on foot traveling through the street network, it changes. So if you have on the far left a well-connected network, that 400 meter as the crow flies is very similar to what it is within the street network. It's a 5-minute walk, and starts to increase as you move further right, to the extent of having basically quadrupling your walk because of a poorly connected network. So that's something that we've observed in Souk as well. And next slide, please. You can see those areas that are more walkable. The blue areas are also those areas that have a higher land use mix, greater connectivity, and also greater population density. Next slide, please. So this is where we come to understand that land use policy is climate policy, is health policy, is social policy, and more. Greater population densities make a difference. Where transportation may be the challenge, land use can be a solution. And the most important driver of transportation behavior are land use and urban form, both of which this OCP deals with head on. So we've already talked about the importance of land use mix, destinations, physical connectivity, population, so the population density, the concentration of people or homes or jobs is critically important, because that critical mass of people, that body heat, will support or not support viable transit, greater transportation choice, the viability of shops and services, and the ability of people to frequent those on foot within walking distance of home, and therefore more transportation choices. So this is really important because it influences greenhouse gas emissions, physical activity, social cohesion, public life, and more. So it's one of the fundamental directions at the heart of this new OCP. Next slide, please. So the population is growing around the world. It's growing across Canada and BC, and it's growing on Vancouver Island. So people continue to have families, and people continue to move here to contribute and to help shape our evolving communities. So the question isn't whether Souk's population is going to grow, it's how it will grow. How will you allow Souk to grow? How will that population growth be distributed within the district in order to bring the community vision to life? Next slide, please. So as part of this process, Colliers International, so they're the development and land economics specialists on our team, adapted these population projections from the housing needs assessment for Souk that was undertaken in 2019. So we came to understand that Souk had, in 2016, which is the latest data we have from the census, had an estimated population of just over 13,000 people. By 2050, the population is expected to grow by an annual rate of 2.9%. So to reach a total population of about 18,500 by 2030, 22,000 by 2040, and almost 26,000 by 2050. So this translates into future residential demand of an additional 1,800 homes by 2030. Next slide, please. So understanding where that population growth ought to go, how that growth can protect the attributes of Souk that are cherished, and how that growth can help address the attributes that must change or must be improved upon, become an important context for the community-wide dialogue over the last year. And I'll turn it over to Emily to talk through a little bit about some of the insights that we came to glean through the voices of the community.
Thanks, Jennifer. So as Jennifer has emphasized, we believe that residents have deep-seated knowledge about their community. So as we think through the future of Souk, we celebrate the tremendous value their lived experiences bring to the process. And that's really where engagement comes in. It's our conversation with the community, and it's part education, answering what is an official community plan. It's part imagination, discovering what the future could be. And it's part evaluation, making tough decisions together as a community. And in the end, it's our objective that this OCP reflects Souk's unique thumbprint, the story of place that makes Souk distinct. We want it to be relevant to the community so that the community's voice is heard through its pages. And because folks feel like they're a part of its creation, we equally want them to feel part of bringing it to life. Implementation is where things get tough. Of course, we were challenged by a pandemic to find ways to come together while remaining at a distance, and yet Souk residents came together to provide a tremendous amount of rich feedback during this process. So we arrived at today's milestone after 2 extensive phases of engagement. First, we built a foundation of contextual knowledge, all that Jennifer has just spoke to. And then we entered this moment of expansion in our process, where we engaged to hear any and all community aspirations, priorities, and challenges. And then we applied technical knowledge and worked with the advisory committee to take what we heard and synthesize it into draft vision and goals and different scenarios for how growth might unfold in the community and what it could look like. And then we took it back out to the community. And this is where we checked in to see how well the draft vision and goals actually aligned with community values. We also asked about the growth scenarios and communicated that they're not options, but pathways, and wanted to hear what was working and what wasn't working about each. And the feedback was directly applied to drafting the OCP today, both in the vision, the goals, thinking through growth, and also what that growth might look like. So we listened and we heard some strong themes. We heard about the value of the natural landscape for recreation, views, ecosystem services, habitat, and climate change resilience. Again, very similar to the contextual research we did ahead of time. We heard about the importance of developing the local economy in order to provide jobs, services, amenities, and attractions close to home. We heard about the need of housing options to accommodate a diversity of household sizes and incomes. And we heard about the concern of vehicular traffic congestion and safety, both now and as Souk grows. Related, we heard about the need for safe cycling and pedestrian connections through Souk. We heard about the desire to age in place, ensuring that housing, transportation, and services are attainable to seniors. And we heard about the interest in a renewed relationship with the waterfront through encouraging public access and locating shops and services in the area. And lastly, and super importantly, we heard about the need to develop the OCP through the lenses of compassion and climate action. And when we asked about growth, we heard first and foremost, most strongly, about the desire to keep natural areas natural. Residents preferred to concentrate growth in the town center while distributing some of its benefits, like shops and services, to surrounding built-up areas, which is the primary direction where we've landed on in this land use plan. So as a result of the tremendous commitment of staff, the advisory committee, and importantly the public, we have a draft today that's been shaped by over 2,000 interactions with Souk residents, which is, as Jennifer said, a tremendous point of success for this process. I'll pass it back to her.
Thanks, Emily. And I want to apologize. My video was off earlier. I feel like with every single meeting or presentation, I mess up at least one thing. So it was that. Hopefully that's the extent of it. So yeah, as Emily alluded to or said directly, the engagement was, we think, an enormous success, and it really culminated in this vision for Souk, which has been since shared again, embedded with the community, and it embodies the values, the priorities, and the aspirations of the community. So we can really think of it as our North Star in this regard. So the vision for Souk, the thing that anchors this OCP is Souk is a small town with a big heart. It is a vibrant net zero emissions community cradled in the stunning beauty and vitality of the ocean and forest. It goes on to say, located in the beautiful lands that have been home to the Sauk and Siano First Nations since time immemorial, Souk is known for its active waterfront and protected ecosystems and farmland. Its town center is the hub of public life, defined by a distinct West Coast character. Souk offers exceptional amenities, housing choices, diverse employment, and eclectic arts and culture scene. It is a caring community where people and the environment are treated with dignity and with respect. And I'd like to gratefully acknowledge the good work of the advisory committee in helping shape and refine this before and after it was taken out to the broad community. It's a lot stronger thanks to their input. Next. So extending from this vision statement and further articulating our three sort of goal umbrellas or goal areas, and they are green and net zero, enjoyable and distinct, and equitable and respectful. Next slide, please. So this hopefully will help offer a bit of a framework for the overall OCP and how all the elements fit together. So at the very top, the North Star, as I said, we have the vision. It describes the picture or the end state to which we aspire. From there, we have those 3 goal areas that provide a framework for more detailed goals. Flowing from those, there are 15 more specific goals, and these are the directions that we will be taking on in order to bring the vision to life. And then when you look through the different policy chapters, so transportation, parks and trails, equitable community, you'll see that we have a table. And in that table, we list out the goals that are pertinent to the specific objectives within each of those topics. And then nested within each one of those objectives, we have a set of policies and actions to help bring the actual goals to life. And I should say that the vision and the goals also set direction for the development permit area guidelines near the end of the OCP. Now, it's impossible for me to capture all of the nuance of the OCP in this presentation. We'd be here all night. So I'll just walk through each of the goals and offer a few examples of some of the policies and actions that link back to the goals to help bring them and to help bring the vision to life. Next slide, please. So the first one is about mobilizing to address the climate emergency head on. So this is about achieving a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 60% by 2040, and net zero emissions by 2050. So SUC is responding to the call to action in the face of this climate emergency. Next slide, please. One of the most important ways we can tackle the climate emergency head on is actually through the land use plan, the thing that is at the core of this OCP. So by introducing or by focusing growth in specific areas, by integrating land use and transportation, by managing the number of trips people need to take by car, by increasing densities and shared walls and more efficient buildings, we can really start to see a decrease in our greenhouse gas emissions. Elsewhere in the OCP, we have, for example, in the transportation section, ways to minimize the climate impact of the transportation sector through policies specific to EV charging stations, for example. In the green building section and the infrastructure sections, we talk about leading by demonstrating through municipal buildings, so policies that all new municipal buildings to be built to net zero standards, or for example, to upgrade streetlights to LED bulbs. In the development permit area guidelines, we have one that is specific to energy and water conservation and GHG emissions reductions that look to maximize building energy performance, among other things. So those are just a few snippets of where you can find climate emergency response throughout the OCP. Next slide, please. The next goal is about protection of ecological areas for habitat and agricultural areas for farming, while focusing urban growth within the town center. So as the physical footprint of a community expands, the pressure, of course, is placed on outlying areas. So these are cherished areas, obviously habitat agriculture areas, and they have intrinsic beauty as well as value as the source of all life. Next slide, please. So again, looking at the land use and growth management approach, we begin to understand how we can start tackling the issue of erosion of ecological areas. So ironically, and thinking about, not ironically, but interestingly perhaps, when we think about how we can best protect those natural areas, we can actually look to what we're doing within the urban areas. So becoming more urban in our land uses, we are allowing our rural and environmental areas to be more protected. So SUC will be focusing all future urban growth within this OCP. The direction is to focus all urban growth within the existing footprint. We also have policies to protect ecological areas, for example, in the natural environment policy section. These range from providing policies about subdivision and development plans, having to complement the natural topography, encouraging the preservation of culturally significant vegetation by working with the South First Nation and others, to demonstrate natural processes of integrated rainwater management in parks and trails. And again, development permit areas for environmental protection, for forestry areas, riparian areas, and steep slope areas provide that added protection as well. Next slide, please. The next goal within the green and net zero umbrella is reducing car dependency and offering more transportation choices with priority given to walking, cycling, transit use, and goods movement. So by prioritizing these modes of transportation, SUC will seek to become a community that is best experienced at the pace and scale of a person traveling on their own power. So this in turn will support street life, active living, neighborliness, healthy environment, economic vitality, so many other goals that we have in this OCP. And I want to pause here to note, as was mentioned by Mr. McInnes earlier tonight, that this OCP stands on the shoulders of past engagement and planning work. So the transportation chapter within this OCP does not include the details already found in the TMP, the Transportation Master Plan, but rather it leverages it and it supports implementation. Where some new focus areas emerged in our engagement process for the OCP and maybe aren't necessarily focused on in the TMP, we've supplemented some of that work within the OCP. Same goes for Parks and Trails Master Plan and for other district plans. Next slide, please. Form and character development permit areas, it really is about creating a better experience for pedestrians, making it enticing for people to walk. We don't want people to get out of their cars because they ought to, but because they want to, because it's the best, most pleasurable way to get around. So the form and character DPs in this OCP seek to really reduce that car dependency and encourage transportation choice and delight in Souk. Next slide, please. The next goal is about creating civic infrastructure and landscaping that's both high performing and delightful. So infrastructure such as streets and rainwater collection provide essential services, but they also influence the look and the feel of our neighborhood. So recognizing that the district's infrastructure investments have far-reaching impacts on the well-being of people and the environment, the district, as part of this OCP, will be accounting for long-term life cycle costs of development wherever they're able. So for example, there's policy in the infrastructure section to consider public health and safety, energy and emissions, resilience to climate change impacts, and more in decision-making around infrastructure. Within the infrastructure section, there's also an objective to plan new infrastructure efficiently. So a policy then that limits community sewer service expansion into rural residential areas and agricultural lands, except where it's needed to address public or environmental health issues. On the flip side, Souk will also invite nature into neighborhoods where green infrastructure like urban forests and bioswales enhance the beauty and character of the community and the streets. Next slide, please. The next goal is about expanding and protecting parks and green space throughout the community for the well-being of current and future generations. We know these are places that provide opportunities for gathering, recreation, respite. They're important to the identity, local identity within Souk, sense of place. And so through this OCP and through the Parks and Trails Master Plan that complements it, Souk will protect, reclaim, and expand green space and parks through the community. In the Parks and Trails policy section, for example, there are policies ranging from the implementation of the Souk Parks and Master Plan specifically with respect to the relevance of the goals of the OCP, not replicating this work, but reinforcing and supporting it, through to providing equitable access of parks, such as inclusion of universal design principles to allow all ages and abilities to access and enjoy parks and to use their amenities. Next slide, please. So a part of the enjoyable and distinct part of Souk is about its streetscapes and specifically the town center. So this OCP will bolster streetscapes, homes, and destinations in the town center, the bustling heart of Souk. So the town center is the center of cultural, civic, culinary, economic, and public life within Souk. It will be strengthened as the primary local and community-wide destination for civic participation, shopping, conducting business, working, gathering. We also, through the land use, are looking at how we can make it evolve into a self-reliant neighborhood unto itself, where a growing proportion of residents live and go about their daily lives there. This means there'll be more housing options, shops, and services established within this broader community heart, and its streetscapes will be further brought to life with new public realm investments and developments that reinforce a community character that is uniquely Souk. Next slide, please. And again, doing this through the land use. So in the land use plan in the OCP, you'll see that this is going to be home to the greatest amount of residential and commercial growth, and also the greatest intensity. So here we see up to 6 stories. We see more density here than anywhere else in the city, or in the district rather. And I do want to point out, in case you haven't caught this yourself, that the policies embedded in this section are all accurate and up to date. There are a couple of moments in the land use summary table where some changes haven't been entirely updated. They're very minor, so you might not catch them, but I just wanted to flag that, and so we'll be capturing that for the engagement. But in support of the town center, we also have a land use area called Town Center Transitional Residential. And this is where we are going to see a greater concentration of people, of homes, who will then be within a short walk or roll of the town center, further supporting the town center. And then, of course, anchored to the south by a waterfront area that also will see more mixed-use development there and greater intensities. Again, next slide, please. The form and character development permit guidelines really focus on the street experience within the town center for folks on foot. So design guidelines include ones like this, where you've got, for example, a requirement that windows, glazing be there at ground level to create that engaging relationship between a person going by and the kind of permeability, what's happening on the inside of that shop or that service, creating that visual interest. And then also, avoiding things like large blank walls, because we want to create that comfortable scale for people as they pass by. Next slide, please. So if the town center is the heart of Souk, we know that the waterfront is the soul, or this is certainly something we've heard. So the community has said to protect and connect physically and visibly with the waterfront, keep it public. So in the Sinchosin language, the word sauk is the name of the stickleback fish that lives in the estuary of the river. We know that the word sianu translates from the Klallam language as the place of the big fish. So these names, of course, reflect the richness and importance of the waters that have sustained Indigenous peoples with food and medicine since time immemorial. We've heard from the community that the waterfront is cherished for its stunning views, its fisheries, its recreational opportunities, the tourism it attracts. So this OCP will strive to protect the views, increase physical connections, promote activities that support these activities, like public access, public life, fishing. And so there'll be a great emphasis on pedestrian-oriented waterfront with diverse destinations and activities for all day, all week, all year, diverse housing choices and supportive densities to provide that body heat to support those shops and services. And again, just like we have in the town center, there are form and character development permit areas that will ensure that development that happens there protects the unique character of the waterfront neighborhood, as well as promote some really great experiences for people traveling there on foot. Next slide, please. Another goal for this OCP is to support and enjoy local food. So one of the most intimate and enjoyable ways in which residents interact with living landscapes is through local food. So this includes its production, its processing, its sale, its consumption. All of these things contribute to Souk's identity, its health, sustainability, its local economy. So through this OCP, Souk will continue to protect and celebrate these assets. And restore the lands and waters that are necessary for the hunting, fishing, harvesting, and cultivation of traditional foods. So in the land use plan, there are agricultural land policies directing for the preservation and utilization of capable and suitable agricultural areas. And within more urban areas, there are policies in the Agriculture and Food Systems chapter to integrate food production into public and private lands. For example, to permit non-commercial community gardens where feasible in parks and public vacant lands. Next slide, please. So this is a simple but powerful statement. Acting on this goal of treating streets as a place for people in public life will deliver on so many more of the other goals within this OCP. So streets are public places. They're places. So they function as corridors in the way that people move through them, but they're equally important as places for sitting, for playing, eating, socializing, shopping, lingering, and more. So Souk will continue through this OCP to invest and regulate streetscape quality, including through the character and functioning of buildings and public spaces, to elevate the experience of people spending time in them. So the transportation chapter, for example, identifies walking and rolling as top priority, consistent with the TMP, creation of complete streets that focus on the safety and comfort of people traveling on foot. And likewise, the form and character DPs really drill into some of that detail with respect to creating a really positive relationship between public and private spaces so that pedestrians feel comfortable and enjoy their time within streets. Next slide, please. Support local businesses. So supporting existing local businesses and encouraging the establishment of new businesses and employment to foster community economic development that respects ecological limits. So we've heard time and time again that local businesses are well loved by locals and by visitors alike. They help shape Souk's character, they provide services and jobs, they keep the benefit of local spending in the community. And so through this OCP, Souk will continue to support these businesses while welcoming new ones that provide additional high-quality jobs for young adults and others. So Souk will focus on a green economy, recognizing that the economy is sustained, contained, and provisioned by the environment, and therefore must serve to protect it. So in the Community Economic Development chapter, there are policies that range from commissioning a hotel and tourism study to identify a viability of attracting uses that can support hospitality, tourism, hotel, and conference facilities, ranging to policies about creating a user-friendly development process guide that clarifies development application requirements during the design, permitting, and construction process. So we heard in a workshop with developers that streamlined and predictable processes were key for them. And so this is something that is now made its way into the OCP. And to bring it back to land use again, mom and pop shops benefit from foot traffic. So focusing new housing where there are existing and future shops and services like the town center and waterfront will assist in supporting the local economy and those local businesses. Next slide, please. So elevate Souk's dynamic arts and culture scene. Culture is who people are. So it speaks to our values, our traditions, our expressions. Souk is rich with culture, including the living cultures of the Sauk and Sianu First Nations, as well as diverse settler cultures. Souk values its historic buildings, its unique cultural events, and its strong art scenes. Heritage arts and culture are placemakers or place keepers. They help foster a love of local places. They offer the co-benefits of economic success. So through this OCP, Souk will continue to support local arts and culture, creating more spaces to increase its visibility. So for example, through this OCP, there are policies about involving artists in community planning processes, such as art space engagement, and supporting integration of public art in the design of public and private buildings and open spaces, like the waterfront, the town center, parks, and streets. Next slide, please. This is a phrase that comes from the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and this is about committing to address the urgent need to respect and promote the inherent right of Indigenous peoples, including their rights to the land, territories, and resources. So we know that colonial processes, policies, structures, they continue to perpetuate the oppression of Indigenous people. It's not something that happened in the past. It continues today. So the district's commitment through this OCP to reconciliation begins with a recognition of its responsibility to move beyond positive intent and to take action in a way that enables positive impact. So as part of this OCP, the district commits to implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and will seek to build and sustain a relationship of respect and understanding with the Sauk and Sianu First Nations, which is, part of already really positive and ongoing conversations between the two governments. And I've already mentioned policy examples such as protecting culturally significant vegetation, protecting and incorporating Indigenous food harvesting. Other examples in the Arts and Policy chapter, for example, include incorporating Indigenous naming, signage, and visibility through Souk, to partner with the Sauk First Nation on the creation of a new neighborhood plan for the Kaltassan area, through the MOU working group between the district and Sauk to commit to developing an action plan to implement UNDRIP, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, locally. And ultimately, we'll rely on that continued government-to-government discussions and partnerships that are, as I mentioned, already positive and ongoing. Next one, please. So keep Souk affordable, provide housing for choices for all. We heard this a lot. So Souk is seen as an affordable housing community, or an affordable community for many, but it's also changing. We've even heard that there's this palpable change in the last 1 to 2 years. So some residents are navigating a housing system that's not meeting their needs. So these include people who are singles, fixed incomes, lone parent families, low-income households. And so we know that equitable communities, like the type of community Souk aspires to be, offers a range of housing choices for all. So through this OCP, Souk will protect and improve its overall affordability by enabling a diversity of housing types and tenures in all neighborhoods so that residents have access to homes that are affordable, attainable, and appropriate. Next slide, please. And one of the most important ways this happens through an OCP is actually through the land use. I keep coming back to the land use plan, but it really is so instrumental. It's such a powerful mechanism. And so something we've done with this OCP that sets it apart from your current OCP is opening up more choice within area throughout Souk and specifically outside of the town center and some of those higher density areas. So in the community residential neighborhoods, we're now opening it up to a little bit more density and a little bit more diversity of housing types. So adding these tenure and housing type options throughout will benefit more people. It'll provide mortgage helpers in some cases for homeowners. It'll allow people to age in place, provide smaller unit sizes, hopefully more rental. Another way in which this OCP can influence affordability is through transportation choices. So we know that in Souk, the average household spends $15,000 a year on transportation. So cutting back on the amount of gas, for example, vehicular costs that folks are having to pay, you can shift some of those dollars to housing or to other things. So the transportation choice conversation is really a conversation around affordability as well. The housing policy chapter allows supportive housing in all areas of Souk. So this is housing that combines homes with services for people who face complex challenges such as poverty or persistent physical or mental health challenges. So this is something that will be now permitted in all areas of Souk according to this OCP. And then also there's direction within this OCP to consider exempting rental floor space and maximum density allowances where appropriate. To review the existing reserve fund to determine how effective it's been in developing affordable housing. So those are a few examples. Next slide, please. So the second to last goal here is about equally honoring diverse identities and lived experiences. So including those of equity-seeking people in the services that Souk delivers in its public spaces and in the built environment. So there, as of course you're all aware, there's growing knowledge about how the ways in which communities are planned can disproportionately benefit or harm entire groups of people due to their income, their ethnicity, their gender, their age, their sexual orientation, their immigration status, their religious beliefs, or their abilities or disabilities. So through policies on topics ranging from affordable housing to transportation, this OCP strives for the just inclusion of all people in the community in which everyone can prosper, participate, and reach their full potential. So for example, in the Parks and Trails chapter, we have policies that require the incorporation of Indigenous perspectives and worldviews and the formation of park types. It supports the removal of oppressive symbols such as plaques or monuments that pay tribute to figures that are representative of colonialism, racism, other forms of oppression. The Community Economic Development chapter supports businesses led by equity-seeking members such as BIPOC folks, women, persons with disabilities. The Recreation and Community Services chapter requires universal design principles in the design and construction of all new community facilities and major retrofits, so that the equity lens is something you see permeate most of the chapters, and you can find policies that are pertinent to that goal throughout. And then the last goal statement is about creating a safe and resilient community for all. So one of the most well-loved qualities of Souk we heard through the engagement is the feeling of neighborliness and safety throughout the community. At the same time, we heard that due to vehicular traffic and a disconnected walking network, people have expressed concern about safety, pedestrian safety in neighborhoods. And so through this OCP, Souk will continue to strengthen the overall sense of safety through supportive urban design and social infrastructure, while prioritizing safety improvements in the pedestrian realm. So we have some of those improvements spelled out in the Transportation Master Plan and in this OCP. We also recognize in this OCP that safety is relevant. So ensuring that diverse perspectives are captured in the planning and decision-making process. So for example, in the Equitable Community chapter, we are suggesting or directing, the language is require, that advisory committees be representative of the community. So this includes youth and elders and those from equity-seeking groups, low-income folks, folks who rent homes, and others. So now I've just really scratched the surface of this OCP, but hoping that some of these illustrative examples give a bit of color to how the vision and goals we brought to life based on what the community has dreamed. Next, please. So I'd like to close with the same inquiry posed to the community at the outset of this process. So the OCP is the culmination of the dream part of this question, and now we really need to be focusing on the act part of this question. So an implementation strategy in this OCP begins to operationalize some of these things by providing direction on timeline and leadership in terms of role and partnership. So to realize this vision and the goals, the same energy and passion that went into creating these plans must also go into implementing it. And sometimes this needs to happen in the face of significant challenges and tough choices. So it will require acting boldly and acting courageously. So I just want to end by saying it's just an exciting moment for this process and for SUC, and we're so honored to have been involved, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and we most welcome your questions and any discussion. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that very thorough presentation. There's a lot for us to absorb there just in what you have provided tonight. So it would likely be helpful for members of council to also receive this PowerPoint, because I noted that many of us are taking notes, but as the slides change, we can't take in everything. So it would be helpful for us to have that as well. So I will I'll turn it over to members of the committee and members of council, committee as council is. Before I do that, I just wanted to acknowledge Councillor Beddoes for his work with this committee. Councillor Beddoes stepped up to chair the committee, I think it was a year ago, wasn't it, that this started? I think it was about that, it's blurring together. And then had to find ways to continually work through COVID and changing restrictions to do that engagement. But as you can see, he was able to successfully do that and to also keep the committee together moving through that process as well. So it's certainly just making the most of the situation that we're in. So I'll just maybe open it up that I really like where we're heading with this. I just have a technical question more for staff. So we have an OCP that's in a draft form. We have an existing OCP as well as zoning bylaws that follow that OCP. Where I'm concerned with is how do we get the developers who are building to pivot to our new OCP and not to fall back on the current OCP, because one is in effect until another one replaces it, and then with our zoning bylaw, that's all in effect until another zoning bylaw replaces it. So how does it work when we have, this is what we're aspiring to, yet we have folks with land rights, with current zoning and so forth that's currently in place, because there are, in some cases, will want to hang on to those more dated policies and bylaws that are in place.
So I'll give you a response on a possible option that we can move forward with, and then perhaps Jennifer may want to comment just on her experiences with municipalities that have recently adopted OCPs and what kind of direction that they've taken. In many instances, those applications that have been submitted previously are under review. When we have the bylaw come forward for the OCP, we can have language in there that says any active applications currently under review can be subject to the previous OCP, or depending on how much of a difference there is moving forward, and council feeling very strongly based on public input through the public hearing process of the bylaw, we can require those applicants to work with us to make those changes to come into more alignment. But perhaps I'll just seek some further input from Jennifer if she's seeing a specific trend or approach that other municipalities recently are taking with that very question you've posed.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. I wouldn't add too much to what you said, although I have worked with communities where, for example, if a developer was early in the development process and the community was nearing the end of the OCP process, much like where SUC is now, they just request that the developer hold off for 2 to 3 months until the new OCP is adopted.
Okay, because it's just with the pressure, I took Councillor Lajeunesse to this because it just floored me to see it. Like, for example, there's a unit, it's a stacked duplex up and down. The bottom unit is down a lovely flight of stairs with no handrails, 25 steps, bumping all the way down, narrow, producing gas line that you'll hit halfway down to a base, and then another flight up to the grand entrance. Not accessible, not inclusive, not affordable, not safe, and yet that's on the market right now. So it's just how, seeing that there may be an appetite for some buyers, but I think it's just with limited sales options, that's what some folks are stuck with. However, to see that continually pop up in that type of design, it's just not, it doesn't make me proud of any of our policies if that is the product that's emerging. Really, it's dreadful. Any response?
Certainly, a number of prospective developers have reached out to us, being aware of the process that's currently underway, and so we've given them some input now that we do have draft policy of what the community has been saying. None of these developers have submitted applications at this point, but they're certainly being mindful, and I think that's a good shift for the district to be able to have that open line of communication with prospective developers, knowing that ultimately we are headed in a certain direction. If they're seeking staff and ultimately council's approval on these items, that if they're ahead of the game now and can kind of pre-plan for what can be expected, they'll be in a better situation moving forward. I think that's just a change of the times and knowing the critical elements of an OCP as opposed to what we may have thought 10 years ago and are currently working on based on current policy.
Yeah, and I'm also, those sorts of products, I don't even think reflect the older, like the current OCP that we have. So how that sort of piece emerged is just something that we need to close that gap. Okay. All right, so I'll open it up to members of council. We're in committee of the whole that may want to, maybe we'll ask some questions and then we'll go to see any public input and then we can come back for some resolutions, that sort of thing. So Councillor Bateman, okay, go ahead, Councillor Beddoes.
Well, I just like that comment from staff that at this particular time with the draft, with its warts, because being from the committee, we know it's not perfect, but it's getting there. And the fact that staff can use that with dealing with the developers that are here wishing to do business in Souk, and that they respond to the fact that we will be changing the OCP. I like that. That's working very well, and that's a hats off to staff. And I'm glad that we have this OCP, even in its present state, that you can use that as some leverage with this. So thank you for taking that into consideration.
Okay, Councillor Bateman.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Ms. Fix, in particular, for that presentation. I found it absolutely fascinating, and so good, in fact, that I believe that the text from your script, you were reading from a script, I believe, that needs to be incorporated almost as written into the goal areas, to take us through each of the 14 goal areas, 15 goal areas, and because, in reading this document, which is a challenge, I agree with Helen and others on the OCP committee that it's a lot to take in. And of course, I too have had about a week to read what I've seen. But the material that you just shared, I think would be hugely valuable, and it would bring the color and vision that you speak of into the document itself. I realize that the OCP is a top document, a top note document, umbrella document. You have this document as well, which includes many of the maps you were showing, along with all the rationales for where Souk is headed and where the public, this pre-public engagement, I think. But we also have the public engagement documents. So there's, I guess the art and the trick is to incorporate key aspects of it into the official community plan, and or just have links leading to these key other documents. So, yes, so in addition to the mayor's request for the PowerPoint, please send us that script and/or work with the planning department to incorporate it into the draft OCP or into your final version. But as Helen was saying earlier, I believe her hesitancy would likely diminish remarkably after hearing what you've just said, and to know that it would be part of this OCP. I don't really have, shall I carry on? Yeah, okay. Just in trying to come to grips with this, I went back to the request for proposals, okay, and looked precisely at what was expected of you. And I see we're in stage, I think it is E of the process. There were some very clear objectives stated on page 10 of the RFP, and I'll just quickly run through a few of those. Develop the OCP with high degree of community input that will be endorsed by the community. So a big check on that despite the pandemic. So difficult process, but well done. Develop an OCP that provides clear and consistent guidance and direction for council staff and the development community. So I believe the implementation plan does this relatively well, though there are 47 short-term priorities, and none are being given in recommendation of order of action. So I'd like to see perhaps a refinement, if indeed that's a logical process. Number 3, establish a user-friendly OCP that is easily understood by the public, decision makers, and staff. And I think if you were to incorporate that script material along with the infographics that I understand are coming in the next phase, that would improve this dramatically in terms of understandability. Achieve an OCP that defines and enhances the unique character of Souk. Now, I wasn't so sure in reading the draft, but in hearing your comments, I think that would really, words like a small town with a big heart is very powerful, but for you to speak of a compassionate, I think there's lots there that could be incorporated. Just 3 more here. Improve development guidelines to achieve desirable form and character of future development, and definitely a win here with Part 6 and the section on development permit areas. Provide, number 6 on the objective list, provide a professional, aesthetically pleasing, and legislatively correct OCP. So I think the aesthetically pleasing piece could be improved, but otherwise it's very professional and legislatively correct. And finally, build organizational and community capacity to continuously improve and implement OCP goals. So I'm interested to note that in the 2010 OCP, it suggested, rather than recommended, but suggested an OCP implementation and monitoring committee. So as I believe we hold it now, we're leaving this up to staff and this and future councils to implement along with other, So maybe a implementation monitoring committee would be in order. And I've got lots more to say, but my time is up. Thank you. And thanks again for the presentations. Yeah, really.
I haven't cut you off, though. You do have some other comments you'd like to make, because I think I'd rather hear from you rather than not hear from you. Okay. Right?
Okay, I'll run through this quickly, just the high points. I'd like to see some context that links this OCP with previous OCPs and local area plans of the CRD, because this does indeed reinforce this desire for a town-centric Souk of the future. The 50% GHG target, I'm curious as to why you opted for the provincial target when council has had very little input into this process to date, apart from Councillor Beddoes, and that was one thing we did expressly ask for. I'm sure there's a good reason that you've done this. Population and demographics, I see the committee noted that they would request newer numbers. Just to note that the next census data is being released on February 9th of next year. So that's population and dwelling count results. So it would be good to have that material in the OCP if it can be delayed for a few months. I agree with the committee that the climate section needs a rewrite. I'd like to see under page 205 of implementation, a section dedicated to the list of relevant District of Suit documents that have been reviewed as part of this process, along with perhaps some very point-form details about what those plans represent and how they interact with the OCP. You haven't mentioned in that implementation section the existing plans, childcare needs, housing, economic analysis, and the parks and transportation plans. Then, more importantly, I believe, is the priority order for the plans to update. You've listed they're not listed in alphabetical order, the plans that need updating: zoning bylaw, town center plan, wildlife protection plan, et cetera. So I'm wondering if those could be prioritized. I know zoning bylaw is first, and I would hope the committee, I believe, really wants to see the town center plan next on the list. I also think there should be a glossary for geeks like me, so that a term like affordable can be defined. And finally, I note that you include the Noose lands as one of the statement of intent areas on page 12, and I think that, I'm not sure that belongs in our OCP. And I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I have to say that having listened to Jennifer's and Emily's presentations was a lot more inspiring than reading the entire document in a sitting as I did this afternoon. And it would be great to inject some of that enthusiasm and vision into the document itself, as I think Councillor Bateman was alluding to. I did find the actions and objectives section quite repetitive, and I think I know it's a draft, so there's, but I think there's room to tighten up a lot of the document and make it more concise and readable. And that's all for now.
Thank you, Councillor Lajeunesse. I'll go online. Councillor McMath or Councillor Logans, any comments from you while you're online? Maybe start with Councillor McMath.
Hi. I just appreciate everybody's work and commitment, and although there's, like mentioned previously, lots of different personalities, everyone has the same goal in mind, and so you can see that really start to take shape here. Some of the pieces that are missing are, there's sort of these general statements that they sound fantastic and they do promote the community vision, but there isn't a clear measurement, or there isn't, like we've touched on before, it's not clear as to how SUC is going to capture that and enforce that. And then I did want to hear a little bit more from staff just on how the OCP blends with federal, provincial guidelines, and then sort of if the Economic Development Group and our, oh my gosh, it's escaping me right now, but our planning group as well, and if they find that it's translating across the board between all those parties as well.
Okay, over to staff.
Thank you. So one of the pieces that we are going to be working on throughout the next stage of engagement is working with all the committees of council, so the Economic Development Committee and Land Use Committee, Climate Action Committee, and so forth. Now that we have a draft available, before, we had all of the other pieces that we were working on getting kind of that community vision in place. Now that we actually have a draft to go forward with, we'll have those opportunities to engage with those committees and get their feedback, being one, able to note specifically some of the specific policy areas that would be of most relevance to them, but also explaining how that then plays a part in the overall land use component of the document in its entirety. So that's kind of our target moving forward into the next phase of engagement. And sorry, there was another question.
There's one that Councillor McMath asked, and it was about provincial or federal, like how this blends with federal and provincial policy. I think a big one is treaty. We're in an agreement in principle piece right now, but should the province be able to actually sign off on the Tait Treaty, like how would that impact and what shift or change? I mean, it's hard to know because we don't know. But it is a priority of the current provincial government. So I see that there could be potentially some action in the very near future, or in the next coming years anyway.
That's right, and as part of our stakeholder list and partners that we identified, obviously Sauk Nation was a specific partner that we've had the opportunity to speak with and really incorporate a lot of information and actually learn a lot and become more knowledgeable about the use of land and a lot of things that we can incorporate into this document and use that as a good process to move forward in working on that relationship. And I think it was back in June, the joint media release of the District of Sauk and Sauk First Nation working together on a lot of these items. I think our engagement with them and our discussions have captured a lot of that information that just wasn't known and documented previously, and we look to build upon that even further. A lot of other partners that we have as well at the provincial level, speaking with them, a lot of their comments to date have been a simple response of, we'll provide more input once there's a draft available. So we're fortunate now to be at that stage where we can have more of that meaningful discussion with them. They wanted us to go through our engagement process, highlight what was important at a local level, and then bring that information forward so we can address a lot of those pieces. And then also with the climate piece as well, sticking with the provincial target as kind of where we want to be at to address what the provincial piece is, but also knowing that there's other strategies that can be developed over time that might exceed that target as well. But certainly at this point, just making sure that we've captured all those elements. And then we have the legal review at the end, so that will confirm with legal counsel that we've met all of our mandated requirements as well.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor McMath?
It does, thank you, because I think our previous OCP is a fantastic foundation, but one of the issues that has come up frequently is how the OCP doesn't match what like our building guidelines are, and our building guidelines don't match federal and provincial mandate, and so it's just so that all three of those pieces complement each other and there's no confusion or mixed messages. So thank you so much for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Logans, any comments questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I did want to follow up a bit on what Councillor Bateman stated and the response we got from staff regarding the reduction in emissions to 2050 and matching the provincial targets. Knowing now that we will be in discussion with the province about the process, and they may be aware of our goals there, and that also that council wanted to make more bold moves in that area, necessary and bold moves. I think it would be a good idea to be a little bit more, I guess, leaning towards the council resolution than the provincial standard for that, especially because it could be a good time to advocate for what we want in our community as well and tell them we're going above and beyond. Knowing that we can go beyond that as well, I think putting it in writing in such an important document really pushes us to try to achieve better, and I think our community can.
Okay, some feedback from staff or the consultant?
Your Worship, I think that just carrying on what you said in your opening comments, those targets may change and they may become more rigorous than 50%. And I think not having a specific number in the OCP, but just following the provincial lead, may be a good strategy for us. 10 years from now is a long time away, and I think the landscape's going to look much different than it does right now. So as you suggested, instead of having to amend the OCP when the provincial targets move, perhaps we should just have that we will follow the provincial targets as opposed to a hard number.
Yeah, I think in part is also have a solid strategy, though, because that's what our community will be looking for. It's just having that strategy as a tool that council and staff can use when there's pushback on something. So if someone wants, I mean, for example, if I hear an employer say, well, we have employment standards and we follow the Employment Standards Act, like that's your minimum. Like that's really nothing to brag about. You have to do that. It's the law. So when you hear builders say, oh, we just need to do that, you know, it's fine. Well, let's try to let's try to realize some potential here, like you can do more than that and create an even better product that would be even that more fantastic. So it's just having a strategy that gives us the teeth to be able to do that.
And if I could, Your Worship, I think that the
Yes, to respond, thank you, Mayor Tait. Sorry, to respond to that, I just want to add that this is a community of leaders, not a community of followers, and that is the base reason why we decided to go above and beyond. I realize that it may not be possible to hit those targets, but it needs to be more than the provincial standard.
And I think the 7% solution absolutely gets us that. So for 2022, for example, we need to convert 240 single-family residences to more energy efficient from current stock. So I think the plan is there, and I think using the 7% solution as we go forward and trying to marry that with the spirit of the OCP makes total sense. So I think that the strategy, and I think as we go through the next iteration of public engagement, we'll hear a lot about this in our community. But the requirements of the OCP is we do have to have a target, and we have to have a framework to make that target.
Okay. Other comments, Councillor Logans? Anything
No,
else?
thank you very much.
Okay, I see some hands here in the room, so I'll go to Councillor Beddoes, then Bateman, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to acknowledge, I very much appreciate all of the councillors' comments. It reinforces some of the hard work that the committee's done, and that, yes, it's certainly not the perfect document as we have, but in order to move forward, it's something that we can engage with the other committees, the public, and us as well, to refine it even more. So this is not the end of the line. This is just sort of the middle of the process. And I'm just really happy with the engagement. It's not just a rubber stamp it, let it go. A lot of really, really good questions. Just on the climate action, I mean, there's no doubt that we're in a climate emergency. I mean, I think you'd be stupid not to acknowledge that. But the goals, in order to achieve, I mean, we have to achieve a lot in 10 years or so, but we need the provincial and federal governments on side to even come close to meeting those goals. So I'm a little bit not wanting to put hard things in there when all the controls to making those goals are controlled by somebody else. That's my own personal preference, but there's still a lot of work needs to be done. I think we're all moving in the right direction, and I think this OCP and I think the committee and staff all want to move in that direction. So I'm not displeased with it, but you know, let's be careful. I've got a lot of things here that I have notes and comments on, but I'm choosing to wait until I hear back from the public. I'm choosing to wait to hear back from you, my colleagues, and more input from staff and some of the committees, because I think it will, in time, develop into a pretty neat document for us, and one that's very, very necessary to move ahead. So it is middle of the road, but we're getting there, and I want to thank everybody for their input, especially the OCP committee, which they put their heart and soul into this, and there's some really, really good questions that they've asked, and we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. So thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I'd agree with all of what Councillor Beddoes just said. Yeah, it's a great process, and it's 4/5 or 2/3 of the way through, and it's getting better all the time. So, but back to the 50% GHG emission reduction target with the strategy of the 7% solution. You know, I'll quote from the committee's comments here under GHG emission reduction, reaching net zero targets. Quote, the truly most pressing issue, and that's what Jennifer said earlier as well, doing our part as a community and as individuals in partnership with the province, federal government, and a global movement. So, and I can reiterate what I said back on April 26th when we approved this 50% target, and just note that municipalities are taking the lead in Canada, at any rate, in terms of pushing for bigger targets, bigger cut targets. I quote the BC Municipal Climate Leadership Council, led by former UBCM President Arjun Singh. They are recommending a 50% by 2030. There's a number of BC municipalities who are following suit. And of course, the IPCC, with its Code Red report, has also said 50% by 2030. So we have stated in our strat plan we want to be bold with climate action, as Councillor Logan's stated. You know, the 7% solution is a roadmap for emissions reductions focused on transportation and building, heating and cooling, and that is, it's worth taking a run at it. You know, will we make it? Well, given our success so far in cutting GHGs, likely not, but you've got to take a run at it and make the commitment, and as CAO McInnes says, who knows, in 5 years, by 2030, all sorts of things will be happening, and maybe 50% will be realistic.
Thank you. Just, thank you, everyone. I'll go to members of the public next. I just wanted to make a comment or just ask a bit more about staff in engaging with the province is Highway 14. So, you know, main, very important road for us that sort of cuts right through our town and divides both sides of it. It's how we get them on board. Like, I know that their job is to build a highway, but we need a safe highway that's accessible and walkable. And when the roundabout in, like, we were begging for it to be attractive. We were begging it for be a roundabout, not a traffic light. We wanted the same thing at Souk River Road, but nope, they're going to put in a traffic light. And in some other places, and then no focus on walkability. They're like, well, that's your responsibility. But they own the highway, and it's up to when they choose to do something. So maybe that's an advocacy piece, but it's also, I'd like us to be at a point where we're just on board with making a safe highway, and we don't have to advocate for a safe highway anymore. Right, so that's one piece, is like how do we accomplish that? The schools are another factor, how they're located, and how things can bog down and slow down, and we're doing our part with the improvements to transportation, but in some cases, some schools should be relocated elsewhere and not be where they are in the condition that they are, which is another piece, because even getting some trails to the schools would again take not only the buses, but the children would be able to start walking safely, and that's a big win for us. But we're stuck with the school district and their timeline. If we followed what they presented to us, the new school would be built by now. But they change it based on whatever, and it's a discussion we're not a party of. So they need to be on board as well. And the other one is transit. We finally have a great local area plan. COVID has taken a big chunk out of transit, but it is worrisome that we're stuck waiting to enact the local area plan, which makes a lot of sense for us, but it's a shifting. So, I mean, we can do a lot, but we are dependent on these other entities to step up to the plate as well in our community. So it's a bit of advocacy. It is in policy, but it's also in staff-to-staff dialogue. Like, they just do it so we don't have to advocate. That would be great, because then I would feel that we're actually partners in relationships and we're building stuff together, and not us saying, well, gee, can you make a safe transit stop or a safe access? That's my inside voice coming out now. Just in another point, I had an activity with some of our youth, and a lot of the language they use is around referring as humans, not so much as people, his, her, and they. So I'm not sure how that is incorporated into the OCP, but when we talk about a document that is meant for future generations, I think it's also important for us to consider how the next generation is speaking and engaging with one another, and not how we would form. And that's because that's how everything is starting to roll. So if I know that you shared that the province is waiting for us to go through this engagement, but how can we, yeah, that's nice, but we're still going to do X and focus on vehicles only and not the rest, and not leave you that. So what tool do we have? other than advocacy, or is there?
I think from what I've experienced over the course of the last year is we're making a lot of progress in those areas. Can it be better? Absolutely. Are we going to be getting to a point where we're going to be happy? Of course. I think this OCP is really an indication of what that's going to do to assist staff in having those conversations with those provincial agencies. I know both the planning department and the operations department working so closely together on a lot of capital projects, as well as a lot of the private developments that are coming through, and finding synergies in those areas that actually help put us on the map, and the province is looking closer and saying, okay, it does make sense for us to do a lot of these capital projects now because of the development that's going to be coming to Souk, and kind of addressing those issues that will be coming in the next couple of years, and not making it an issue, solving the problem today. So this OCP, along with the Transportation Master Plan and all of our other documents that we have created to date, and the ones that are being projected as action items, will help us get to that point. And that's where I'm confident with going out to the public and doing this engagement. That's the key piece that we'll be confident going to the province and saying that this is kind of the stamp now of what the community is expecting. So how are you going to help us implement it? Because you're a key component in this.
Thank you, Mr. Paolo. I'll turn over to our staff then to introduce members of the public that may want to speak on this item, please.
Your Worship, as with the beginning of the meeting, we don't have anyone specifically registered to speak, but I do note that there are several members of the OCP committee on the call, so I'd suggest if they did want to speak, they turn on their cameras and raise their hand so they could be acknowledged.
Committee members, we'd love to hear from you since you're online. Hello, Mr. Crystal, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I would just like to compliment Jennifer and Emily on an excellent presentation. I think they've been terrific to work with, and they've captured a lot of the community's issues quite accurately, and I think they've done a very good job.
Thank you, Mr. Crystal, for that endorsement, and thank you for joining with us tonight. Ms. Ritz, I see your hand is also up.
Yeah, I don't have anything particular to add. I just wanted to say so many times I wanted to do a high five to everyone that was speaking. And I just got a little note from my friends, and I said, sorry, I'm still in a meeting, but I said, it's all going good. I said, even inspiring. So, well done, everyone. And I don't know, it is inspiring to see so many of us, the vast majority, we all want the same things. And Mayor Tait, it was just wonderful to see you so animated on these different advocacy things about schools and transit. And yeah, it's wonderful to see us all aligned, and I find it inspiring and hopeful in a time that sometimes I don't feel very hopeful, but I also just think there's so many, and maybe this is what the document, and maybe these moments aren't found in the OCP, but I think there's a lot of people that want to help with this advocacy, and we want to do something. Tell us what we can do. And so I don't know if that's found in an OCP or if that's something that comes from an OCP, but I think as a committee, we're looking for a couple of key things that we can all sink our teeth in and make happen.
That's great, Ms. Ritz. I'm glad you're having an inspiring birthday. And since we are in a federal election, we can always push the candidates to support local governments, as everything they're trying to do is what takes place in communities. And so we can't continually wait for a handout, or when they're shoveling necessary infrastructure dollars off the back of a truck before a writ has dropped or a pending election is called. We need certainty, and local government needs the financial tools to be able to do these things. I find it frustrating to be grant ready on perfect grants and to wait only to get a denied letter in what is like a perfect application. And I know they're oversubscribed. However, if they didn't take so long, maybe the material and supply costs wouldn't be so high where they could fund more projects. I mean, there's just many other tools available, And again, my inside voice is coming out, but I'm just frustrated that there's an election being called and we're sitting here needing necessary dollars to build communities that are safe and inclusive. So they need to, the question is to local candidates and how they're really going to support and champion local government. So as they come knocking or you see them out, I would ask them that question. I'm just waiting for them to knock on my door. But I see that there's other speakers. So go ahead. I think Mr. Grundy is up. Hello, Mr. Grundy.
Hello. Thank you for allowing us to speak, and thank you to everybody who's been part of the committee. I guess the one thing I would just add, and maybe this has been said before, but as we went through this process and we did walk-arounds around town and we did all kinds of things as the committee, we were kind of struck a little bit, I think, about how the last OCP had a lot of what we've got in this OCP, in fact, but really didn't seem to be kind of acted on particularly. And so I think one of the things we're concerned about as a committee is, how does this OCP have some teeth? Like, how does it actually get to be what happens in the future and not something else that isn't really in the OCP? Because it seemed to me there were many things that were happening or have happened in the last 10 years that really weren't supposed to happen, I think, as part of the original OCP from 10 years ago. And so we were really concerned about how we could kind of, is there something we could put in the OCP? Are there things we can do that would make sure that this thing actually really does represent the, the wishes of the community?
That's a really great question, and that is a very valid concern, because it was my earlier comment, like, that is not anything that I mean, I've sat here for 10 years under that OCP, and that certainly is not what I don't think anyone visioned, but it's what is being built in the built-out environment. So how did that happen? So I guess that is the question, staff, is how can we put in, like, where's the teeth, and how can we ensure that this isn't just a great document that, again, in another 10 years, we're like, well, what happened? And why aren't we seeing what we need to, why aren't we achieving this?
I think the key piece I could sum up is, in one word, is momentum. We have a lot of momentum with all of our master plans and other strategies that we're developing and have already been adopted. This OCP, the next likely planning document to be updated is the zoning bylaw, so that it is in compliance with the OCP. And I think part of the challenges that staff have seen over the last couple of years is just a bit of a disconnect between the current zoning bylaw and the OCP. There's a lot of good ideas that were put forward that never really captured itself in the zoning bylaw, or it left it open to too much discretion at the end of the day. And so as a regulatory tool at the zoning bylaw level, developers could proceed with something that might not necessarily had looked like what was developed through the OCP process. So our goal would be to take this vision that's developed through the OCP process and properly implement it at the zoning bylaw level, so that at every stage of the planning process we have something that is reflective of the community and doesn't leave much room for discretion if discretion isn't something to be exercised at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. And I'll just back to Mr. Grundy. I think what happened there, it's a word that starts with a P. It's called politics. So we did have a zoning bylaw. It was called 500. It was replaced with zoning bylaw 600. The OCP had amendments made that allowed for changes that happened, and then zoning bylaw changes that happened afterwards. So I think momentum is critical. I think it's also celebrating the development that we want to see, encouraging more of that, and showcasing it. I think, Suk, there's a lot of interest now, and there's a few that, they're like, what do you want? Tell us what you would like, and we'll build that. So that's the attitude and the relationship that we're trying to build. And I think it's just important that maybe as council training, sometimes you say no, that it just doesn't fit. Sorry, try something else. But I think this is where we need to go. I think the momentum is critical. It's getting pieces going, and then if needed, what do we need to look at in terms of incentivizing X, Y, and Z? so that we can get the build out that we like. We love the library and the design, but it's not the density that we wanted. We wanted some height and some density in that space, attractive building, but it doesn't have the density. Location is perfect, the density is not right. So how do we work with our partners to create that? But I think it's also, the weird dynamic in there is politics, where politics and the council can change the OCP, as has been the case over the years. Are there other members of the public that would like to speak?
There are no new members of the public. I did see that Ms. Ritz had her hand up for a second time.
I was just going to say that in our notes, the OCP committee would like to stay involved with the zoning bylaw if there's an opportunity. We felt it was important to have the same people that were involved in creating the OCP that would somehow be involved in at least reviewing the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, though I hope we haven't burned everyone out through this process, just as we're getting that momentum. The continuity also makes a big difference there as well. So that's something we can certainly take forward to consider. Okay, thank you, members of the public, for joining with us today, as well as any of those that are viewing online. So I'll just look, anything further from members of council online or in the room? Okay, so I'm going to go to our recommendation from the Committee of the Whole. And that is that the Committee of the Whole recommend council receive the draft official community plan dated August 2021, draft OCP, with further feedback from the OCP Advisory Committee being incorporated with community and stakeholder feedback in the upcoming phase of the project. And that Committee of the Whole recommend council proceed with public engagement of the draft OCP in order to obtain broader community feedback. So that's our recommendation. I'll look for a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Bateman. And there's no seconder required. So anything on the motion, Councillor Bateman? Nope. Councillor Beddoes?
I think you left off one sentence there.
Did I? Did I leave out a sentence?
There was a third recommendation.
It's from the supplemental agenda, Your Worship. There's an additional one that can be added to the group, or you can do it separately if you prefer.
Oh, I'm sorry, and that the committee, this one here, right? That the Committee of the Whole recommend council receive the OCP Advisory Committee, OCP-AC notes on the August 2021 draft OCP. Thank you. I was reading this sheet and not this sheet, but thank you, Councillor Beddoes. Okay, so could I have that moved as well? And then we'll just do it as a block. Yeah, are you acceptable? Can we just put that into the block?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Okay, perfect. It's all in the block. Okay, thank you. So any further comments from members of council? Committee? Anyone? Nope. Okay, all those in favor, please? And that's unanimous. Those online, if you're opposed, saying no thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to ask council that we resolve out of Committee of the Whole. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Lajeunesse has moved that council is resolving out of the Committee of the Whole. That is so we can go back into council and then we can endorse that and send it out. Okay? All those in favor, please? And none opposed, so that's unanimous. And the reason why they're here tonight is because otherwise we'd have to wait until September 20th to initiate that process. But in this case, we're back sitting as council, so we can do that at the same time. Okay, so that's 5.4, so I'll read it out again. And that is that council receive the draft official community plan dated August 2021, draft OCP, with further feedback from the OCP Advisory Committee being incorporated with community and stakeholder feedback in the upcoming phase of the project. That council proceed with public engagement of the draft's OCP in order to obtain broader community feedback, and that Committee of the Whole recommend council receive the OCP Advisory Committee OCP-AC notes on the August 2021 draft OCP. So moved by Councillor Beddoes, seconded by Councillor Bateman. Comments on the motion? I think we said enough. Okay, same. Any comments from those online? We're good, so I'll call the question. All those in favor, please. And that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the committee. Thank you to our consulting team and to staff. This is excellent. I'm really excited to see where we go with this. And hopefully with some changing in physical health orders, we'll be able to really meet up with everyone that we haven't met with yet. Okay, so seeing that there's no new business, that brings us to item 7. A motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Beddoes. Stay safe, everyone. We will see you on September 20th, if not sooner. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Good night, everyone.